He told him to open everything, every bag, every pouch, every zipped compartment and folded flap. He said it loud enough that the people in line behind them could hear. He said it the way a man says something when he wants an audience, and the man in front of him, the quiet one, the one with the worn canvas duffel and the salt and pepper beard, and the kind of stillness that only comes from very long practice. He said nothing. He unzipped the first bag without argument. He unzipped the second. He laid his clothes on the cold tile floor of the inspection counter, one piece at a time. And he did not look up. The agent reached across the counter without asking and turned the duffel upside down. Everything came out. A paperback with a cracked spine, a photograph sealed in a plastic sleeve, a small leather pouch with a drawstring top, tied 3 times, a piece of paper so worn it had gone soft at the edges like cloth, a change of socks, an inhaler, a small Ziploc bag of butterscotch candies, and then, last, because it had been sitting at the very bottom of everything else, a flat rectangular box the size of a thick wallet. Navy blue, a small gold seal embossed on the lid. The agent picked up the box. He turned it over in both hands. He opened it, and the color drained from his face. Nobody in the line spoke. But 3 people raised their phones. A grandmother 2 rows back put her hand over her mouth and held it there. And the woman at the adjacent counter, a 12-year veteran of that checkpoint who had processed more than 100,000 travelers, looked at what was inside that box, looked at the man who owned it, looked at her colleague, and she took one very slow, deliberate step away from him. True wealth is what you carry when you carry nothing else. Subscribe right now and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I read every single one, and now. Rewind. 22 hours earlier. The morning he left started before the sun. He had done it that way his whole adult life. Something about the hours before 4 o'clock felt honest to him. Felt quiet in a way that the rest of the day rarely managed, as though the world had not yet decided what it was going to be that day. And in that undecided space, a man could think clearly. He rose at 4:15, made a pot of coffee strong enough to hold a spoon upright, and sat at the small kitchen table of the house in Columbus, Georgia, that he had owned for 19 years. The table had 4 chairs around it. For most of those 19 years, only 2 of those chairs were used with any regularity, his and the one to his left, where his wife Ruth had sat for 31 years, and where he sometimes still placed his coffee mug on the right side of the table, as though leaving the left side clear. The other 2 chairs were for company. Company came often enough. His granddaughter Maya on school breaks, his old Army friend Clarence, who drove up from Phoenix City on the weekends when the fishing was good, the neighbors' kids who had grown up calling him Mr. Walter and still did, even now that they were grown, and had children of their own. His name was Walter James Beaumont. He was 64 years old. He had a knee that clicked on cold mornings. The left one, from a fall, in a place he did not speak about. He had a scar along his left forearm from a piece of metal that had passed through the air at the wrong time in the wrong direction. And he had explained that scar in full to exactly 3 people in his life. He had a habit of folding his hands on the table when he was thinking deeply, his fingers interlaced and his thumbs pressed together, and his wife Ruth had told him more than once that it made him look like a deacon waiting to give a sermon. He had always taken that as a compliment, because he had liked their deacon. He taught 11th grade United States history at Carver Academy, where he had been for 14 years. He taught it the way a man teaches something he has lived alongside, not at a distance, not behind the comfortable glass of pure academic detachment, but close enough that the weight of it was visible when he spoke. Before Carver, he had spent 26 years in the United States Army. He had entered as a private at 18, and he had left as a sergeant major at 44. The highest enlisted rank, the rank that is the backbone of every unit, the rank that privates and lieutenants both go to when the situation is unclear, and they need someone whose judgment has been tested by fire in a literal sense and found solid. He had left the way he had entered, quietly. No ceremony that he requested, no speeches. He had shaken hands, he had received the plaque and the flag, and he had driven himself home in his own truck, stopping for gas once and coffee twice, arriving at the house in Columbus while the street was still dark. The plaque from his retirement hung by the back door. The door he used every single morning, the door he left through at 5:45, because he had wanted to see it on the way out rather than the way in. A going away is just a coming toward something else, he had told the soldiers who had given it to him. They had been 22 and 24 years old, and they had nodded, seriously, the way young soldiers nod, at things they do not entirely understand, but want to respect. He had smiled at that and meant it warmly. They had no way to know what he meant yet. They would. He drove the same truck to school every morning, a dark green Ford with 211,000 miles on it, a cracked front seat cushion he had been meaning to replace for 3 years, and a small photograph of his granddaughter, Maya, tucked into the sun visor, which he looked at every time he pulled into the school parking lot, and which he had never told anyone about, because it was not the kind of thing you mentioned. It was the kind of thing you did. He kept a thermos of coffee in the cup holder and a legal pad on the passenger seat, where he wrote his lesson notes in the mornings in the parking lot before he went in, because the 20 minutes before school started were the clearest thinking he did all day. His handwriting was small and precise, the kind that develops in people who have spent years writing in environments where paper and light were limited. His classroom was room 114, first floor, south wing. He had been in the same room for 11 of his 14 years, and had made small adjustments to it over time, the way a person makes adjustments to a space they intend to keep. A book shelf he had built himself along the back wall, stained the same color as the school's existing furniture, so it looked like it had always been there. 12 additional books on American military history, a section on the Harlem Hellfighters that was not in the curriculum, but that he had added the second year when he realized it was not there. A framed photograph of the 54th Massachusetts Regiment on the wall beside the window. A photograph of Medgar Evers on the wall beside the door. A small all-cactus on the windowsill that a student had brought him 7 years ago, and that had survived 2 drought summers and 1 broken heater winter. He ate lunch alone most days, not from unfriendliness, but from preference. He spent 6 hours a day in a room with 22 young people, and he needed the 30 minutes of quiet the way a body needs water. And his colleagues understood this about him after the first year, and stopped taking it personally. He ate lunch alone, and he read. He was almost always finished with lunch by the time he was a quarter of the way through the chapter, because he ate without paying much attention to it. He went to church every other Sunday at First Baptist on Macon Road, where he had been a member for 16 years. He sat in the fourth pew on the left. He sang in a voice that was not particularly good, but was fully committed. The way you sing, when the words matter more than the sound. The pastor, there, Reverend Agatha Mills, had known Walter for all 16 years and had been to his house exactly twice, once when Ruth died and once on Walter's 60th birthday, when she stopped by with a piece of lemon cake and a card from the congregation. She had told him once that he was the most contained person she had ever met, by which she meant it as the highest compliment. On the kitchen table that morning, beside the coffee, were 4 things. A stack of papers he had already finished grading, red marks sparse, because the class had done well on this particular unit. They had done well because he had taught the chapter on the civil rights movement the week before it, and the chapter on the civil rights movement had made them angry and focused and alive in a way that made everything adjacent to it sharper. A card from his granddaughter Maya, who was 8 years old, and who had drawn an airplane on the envelope in purple crayon and had written across the top in her careful block letters, "Grandpa go on adventure." He had folded the envelope and put it in his breast pocket that morning and would carry it for 3 days without thinking about it, and find it only when he did laundry on Friday and stand there in the laundry room for a moment holding it. A small leather pouch with a drawstring tied 3 times, the way his mother had taught him to tie anything worth keeping, a lesson she had given him when he was 7 years old, and he had taken literally ever since. And the box. He looked at the box for a long moment. Then he placed it at the bottom of the duffel, beneath the folded clothes, beneath the paperback, beneath the photograph in its sleeve, beneath everything else he was taking. He zipped the bag. He finished his coffee. He washed the mug. He locked the door. He was traveling to Washington, D.C., where he had been invited by letter. No phone call, no email, a letter on good paper, in an envelope with formal false seal, to attend a recognition ceremony at the Department of Veterans Affairs. A former student of his, a young man named Darius Webb, who had gone on to serve 2 tours in the Army and was now working in veterans advocacy in the Capitol, had nominated Walter for a recognition. A small thing, Darius had said on the phone when Walter had called after receiving the letter, just a thank you. A room full of people who have been waiting for a chance to shake your hand. Walter had said he wasn't sure about all that. Darius had said, "Sir, it's a Tuesday afternoon. You'll be back by Wednesday night." Walter had agreed. He did not like to let down people who were trying to do something good. The bus to Atlanta took 2 hours and 40 minutes. He read, he watched the Georgia Pine Line out the window, and thought about his lesson plan for Thursday, which needed adjusting. The flight from Atlanta to Reagan National was 1 hour and 50 minutes. He had a window seat in the last row, which he had specifically selected because he liked to be able to see everyone in the cabin. Old habit. He read 37 pages of the paperback, a biography of Frederick Douglass he had already read twice, and was reading again because some books improve with distance, the way music does. He ate 2 of the butterscotch candies from the Ziploc bag. He watched the clouds and thought about Maya's drawing and thought about what he would bring her from Washington. Maybe something from the Smithsonian gift shop. She had been interested in space recently, a model of the solar system maybe, something she could put together with her hands. Reagan National was busy the way airports are on Tuesday mornings, full of men in suits, checking phones at gate intervals, and women with roller bags, moving with the focused energy of people who do this every week and have stopped noticing that traveling by air at 400 miles an hour is a remarkable thing. Walter moved through it with no particular urgency, following the signs, reading the terminal the way he read every unfamiliar space, methodically, without anxiety, noting exits. He reached the customs and secondary inspection corridor, which at Reagan was shared by certain arriving domestic connections, as well as international passengers. The line moved in the slow rhythm of any government checkpoint. A few steps forward, a pause, a few more steps. He stood in line the way he had stood in 1,000 other lines in his life, straight-backed, hands at his sides, patient, unhurried. Not because he had nowhere to be, but because standing straight and being patient cost nothing and gave something back. The agent at the counter was young, late 20s probably. He had the posture of someone who had been given a small, specific amount of authority within the past year or two and had not yet worked out what to do with it. The way a small authority can either teach a person something about themselves or confirm something they already suspected. His name badge read Decker. He had a jaw that worked when he was thinking and pale eyes that moved quickly. He looked at the line in segments, and when Walter reached the front and stepped forward to the counter, there was something in the way Decker looked at him. A particular calibration, a settling, a decision. That happened before a single word was spoken on either side. Walter placed his bag on the counter. He produced his identification. He placed his hands at his sides. The agent looked at the identification. He looked at Walter. He looked back at the identification, which matched perfectly, which had always matched perfectly, which Walter had renewed punctually every 5 years for 4 decades. "Is there a problem?" Walter said. His voice was even. The agent said there was a secondary screening protocol. He said it was routine. He said it with the particular ease of a man who has deployed the word routine before. In this situation, enough times that it no longer costs him anything. Walter said, "All right." The agent told him to open his bags. Walter opened the duffel. He unzipped it and turned it to face the agent across the counter. The agent moved the paperback to one side. He moved the folded clothes. He moved the photograph in its plastic sleeve, turning it once to look at it. A man in dress uniform, standing in a hallway, hands folded, not looking at the camera, and then setting it down. He lifted the leather pouch and shook it once. Listening, he moved the folded piece of paper without opening it. He found the inhaler and held it up, and then he reached across the counter. Without asking, without announcing, he took the bottom of the duffel, and he upended it, and everything that was left in the bag came out across the counter surface, and some of it went over the edge. The paperback fell flat. The Ziploc bag of candies hit the counter, and 2 butterscotch discs slid off the edge and dropped to the floor. The photograph in its sleeve slid to one side. The folded paper landed on top of the photograph, and the box, the flat, navy blue, gold-sealed box, landed last, face up, in the center of the counter, as though it had been placed there deliberately. The agent picked up the box. He turned it over in his hands. He said, "What is this?" Not a question. The inflection of a man who has decided the answer and is stating it with a thin coating of interrogation over the top. Walter looked at him. He said, "Open it." The agent opened it. The room did not go quiet. It was an airport. Airports do not go quiet. But in the immediate circumference of that counter, in the 6 or 8 feet of space around that specific transaction, something changed in the air. The agent's hands stopped. Not slowly, not gradually, all at once. They stopped where they were and did not move. His face changed the way a window fogs. Not one element at a time, but the whole surface, simultaneously. Because on the bed of blue velvet in that flat navy box, hanging from a light blue ribbon with 3 white stars worked into the pattern, attached to a gold bar above a 5-pointed star with an eagle at the center. Smaller than you would expect, lighter than you would expect, more real than anything he had held in his hands in a long time, was the Medal of Honor. The agent stared at it. 3 phones were raised. A grandmother 2 rows back pressed her hand over her mouth and held it there without lowering it. The woman at the adjacent counter took one slow, deliberate step away. True wealth is what you carry when you carry nothing else. There are things you have to understand about that medal before you can understand what came after. The Medal of Honor is the highest military decoration in the United States. It is awarded by the President in the name of Congress for acts of valor that go above and beyond the call of duty, beyond what could be expected or required, at deliberate risk to life. Since the Civil War, the United States has awarded it 3,526 times. In the modern era, since the Second World War, the number drops below 500. Today, fewer than 90 living recipients walk this earth. When those men and women enter a room, by law, by actual federal statute, every officer in the United States military, regardless of rank, renders the first salute. Not to them, from them. Generals salute the private. Colonels salute the corporal. The President of the United States, standing in the Rose Garden, salutes the man in front of him first. That is the weight of the thing the agent was holding. Walter James Beaumont had been 26 years old, a staff sergeant in the 75th Ranger Regiment, when the events occurred that led to the medal. The specific country and specific mission are not fully documented in public records and are his story to tell, not mine. What the record shows is this: 9 men went in. 6 men came home. Walter was one of the 6. The other 5 were alive because of Walter. What he did in the hours between these 2 facts, the hours between 9 and 6, is something he has spoken about in full exactly once to an Army chaplain and has not spoken about in full since. He told a biographer politely that he would rather the chapter on that day be left out. The biographer left it out. Walter thanked him and meant it. He received the medal at the White House. There is one photograph in public archives of the moment. Walter, in his dress uniform, shaking the president's hand, the blue ribbon around his neck, his face holding the expression of a man who is enduring something gracious, because grace requires it. He does not have a copy of that photograph. He has never sought it out. The photograph he carries, the one in the plastic sleeve, The one the agent moved to one side without looking at it carefully, was taken on the same day, in a hallway, before the ceremony began. A soldier named Marcus Greer had a disposable camera. He aimed it at Walter, who was standing still with his hands folded, looking at a middle distance that had nothing in it, thinking. Marcus caught the shutter at the exact moment. Walter was most himself. Marcus Greer died 8 years later in a training accident at Fort Lewis. Walter carries the photograph because Marcus took it, because a man took a photograph of him once just to look at him, and then that man was gone. After the medal, Walter re-enlisted. 4 more years, then more. He became a sergeant first class, then a master sergeant, then a sergeant major. He deployed 3 more times to 3 different theaters. He trained more young soldiers than any number he has ever tried to count, because counting them felt like it was missing the point. He never used the medal to get a discount on a meal. He never placed it in a frame on any wall. He stored it in a drawer in his bedroom beneath a folded flag and a set of service ribbons and a letter from Marcus Greer's mother that he had received years after Marcus died, thanking him for being the kind of man her son had chosen to serve alongside. When he retired at 44, he drove himself home, and he walked into his wife Ruth's kitchen, and she looked at him for a long moment, and he looked back, and she said, "So," and he said, "So," and she said, "Sit down, Walter. I made chili." And he sat down, and she gave him chili, and that was the best homecoming he had ever had. He taught for 14 years because he believed, not abstractly, not as a civic platitude, but as a conclusion reached through experience, that if young people understood where they came from, they had a fighting chance of knowing where to go. He taught the civil rights movement with the same weight he gave the Revolutionary War. He taught the Tuskegee Airmen, and he taught My Lai, and he taught both of them honestly, because he believed his students deserved the truth over the comfort of a cleaned-up version, and because the truth, properly taught, created something stronger in them than comfort ever would. He had brought the medal to Washington because Darius Webb had asked him to bring it, had said that at the ceremony they would like to see it, that a room full of veterans and advocates would understand what it meant. Walter had thought about it for longer than Darius knew, because Walter thought carefully about the box and where it went and who it was shown to and why. He had decided that for that room on that occasion, for those particular people, it was the right thing to bring. He had not planned on bringing it out at a customs counter. But here they were. The agent named Decker had not moved. His supervisor was already crossing the floor toward him. She had seen his face, that particular expression, the one that does not have a name in the training manual, but that every experienced supervisor recognizes, the expression of someone who has just understood that they are on the wrong side of an irreversible moment. She covered the distance from her station in approximately 7 seconds and arrived at the counter and looked at the box in Decker's hands. Her name was Supervisory Officer Renata Olson. 11 years at Reagan National. She had processed or overseen the processing of hundreds of thousands of travelers. She had seen a great many things come out of a great many bags. She had never seen that. She looked at the medal. She looked at the man who owned it. At Walter, whose expression had not changed, who was standing with his hands at his sides, his face steady, not performing anything, not waiting for anything. Just present, the face of a man who has seen enough that his baseline for what constitutes a crisis is calibrated at a level most people never reach. She said, "Sir, I apologize." Walter looked at her. He said, "I need my candy up off the floor." Renata Olson bent down herself in her supervisory uniform with the agency insignia and picked up both butterscotch candies from the floor and placed them back in the Ziploc bag and sealed it. She placed the bag gently on the counter. She replaced the paperback. She placed the photograph in its sleeve. She placed the folded paper. She placed the socks and the inhaler. She placed the leather pouch. And then she placed the box carefully at the bottom of the duffel, beneath everything else. She told Decker to log the interaction. Decker read the log number in a voice that had lost most of its texture. She said, "Log it fully." There was a pause. She said it again, every detail. Priya Okafor was 23 years old, on her way to a graduate school interview at a law program in the district, and she had started recording on her phone when she watched the bag get turned upside down. She had been filming for 4 minutes and 11 seconds by the time the supervisor reached the counter. She filmed the agent's face when the box was opened. She filmed the supervisor's face. She filmed Walter's face. Steady, unperforming, the same face it had been at the beginning. And she filmed the 2 butterscotch candies being picked up from the floor, and she kept filming until Walter had picked his duffel, through and walked through the checkpoint without another word. There were 5 other people close enough to that counter to have seen what happened clearly. Not at a distance, not in a peripheral blur, but close enough to have watched the bag go upside down, close enough to have seen the clothes on the counter, close enough to hear the tone of voice. Of those 5 people, 4 of them looked away before the supervisors arrived. Not dramatically, not with visible discomfort. They simply found something else to attend to. Their phones, their boarding passes, the middle distance. This is the thing about those moments in public spaces, in lines, in lobbies and corridors. The looking away is not usually contempt, and it is not usually approval. It is something quieter and harder to name. The calculation, made in less than 2 seconds, that what is happening over there is not your problem in a way that makes it your problem to have decided. 4 people made that calculation. The 5th was a retired schoolteacher from Richmond, Virginia, named Edith Coombs, who was 71 years old and traveling to see her son, and who had a voice that had spent 38 years carrying to the back of a classroom without a microphone. She said, in that voice, "That is not how you treat a person." She said it clearly, and to no one in particular, and to everyone at once. The way to say a true thing when you are past the age of worrying, but social cost of saying true things. Decker did not acknowledge her. The agent at the adjacent counter glanced at her and away. But Walter heard her. He turned his head slightly. Not all the way, just enough. And he looked at Edith Coombs for one moment. He did not nod, and he did not speak. But he heard her. Priya Okafor stood in the arrivals corridor for 2 hours with the videos on her phone, debating. Then she posted it. By the time Walter checked into his hotel, it had 40,000 views and rising. By the time he crossed the street and ordered a cup of soup at the restaurant, because he was tired, and soup felt right for tired. The number was 220,000. By the time he was asleep in the double bed, with the television off, and the curtains drawn against the D.C. streetlight, a veteran in Cincinnati named George Timmons, 43,000 followers, mostly veterans, mostly people who had served or loved someone who had shared the video with a caption that said, "I served with men like this. I served under men like this. And I will not stay quiet about what I just watched." George Timmons did not stay quiet. His network did not stay quiet, and they were not a quiet group on the best of days. By midnight, the veteran community online, a community that is large and organized and capable of a particular, focused, purposeful kind of attention when it is aimed, had identified the airport, identified the checkpoint, identified the agency division, and had begun a sustained and documented and entirely legal campaign of pressure directed at every public communications address the Department of Homeland Security maintained. They did not break any rules. They did not need to. They simply made it impossible for the agency to pretend the video was not there. True wealth is what you carry when you carry nothing else. By 6 the next morning, the video had 1.4 million views. By 7, it was on 3 national news sites. By 8, the Department of Homeland Security Public Affairs Office had received 46 separate press inquiries, and the phone had not stopped. By 9, a reporter from a wire service had located Carver Academy in Columbus, Georgia, and spoken to Walter's department head, a woman named Dr. Patricia Simmons, who had worked alongside Walter for 9 of his 14 years, and who told the reporter, on the record, and without hesitation, that Walter Beaumont was the finest colleague she had encountered in 22 years in public education, and that anyone who had spent 5 minutes in his classroom understood something about what the word dignity actually meant in practice. Walter woke at 4:15, as he always did. He turned on his phone for the first time since landing. He looked at it for a while. He put it face down on the nightstand. He made the hotel room's coffee, which was worse than his coffee but present, which counted for something. He drank it. He picked up his phone again. He called Maya. Maya answered the way she always answered his calls when he was traveling, with a kind of compressed urgency, as though she had been waiting but did not want to seem like she had been waiting. She said, "Grandpa, a boy at school said you're on the internet." Walter said, "I suppose that's probably right." Maya said, "Are you famous now?" Walter said, "I am the same man I was yesterday, baby." She considered this. She said, "I know. But are you famous now?" He said he would see her on Thursday. He put on his best trousers. He had packed 2 pairs, and the better pair was the one with the clean crease, and his good shirt, and the jacket he wore when he wanted to be presentable. And he went to the Department of Veterans Affairs for the ceremony that had brought him to Washington in the first place. 43 people were in the room when he arrived. Several of them looked up when he entered with the particular expression of people who had seen something recently and are now placing it in 3 dimensions for the first time. 2 of them were Medal of Honor recipients, men who understood, without anything being said, what the video meant and what it had cost and what Walter's face in it had meant, the face that had not moved, that had not asked for pity, that had simply waited. One of them, Colonel Raymond Ash, retired, Korea, 81 years old, and moving with two canes, crossed the room when Walter took his seat and shook his hand and held it for a long time and said nothing. Some things do not need words between men who understand each other. Darius Webb spoke about Walter's 14 years of teaching, about the dozens of students who had gone on to serve in part, because of the way he taught them what service meant, about the particular quality of his presence in a classroom, the way he could hold the heaviest facts of American history in both hands and hand them to a 16-year-old without dropping them and without sanitizing them and without losing the thread of what was still worth believing in. He spoke for 11 minutes, and he got it right, and Walter sat in the second row with his hands folded and did not look away. The Secretary of Veterans Affairs had added herself to the program at 10 that morning, less than 24 hours after she would have if the video had not existed. She spoke for 12 minutes. She did not name the agent. She did not name the airport. She spoke about what it means to carry a thing for 21 years and never mention it, to carry it at the bottom of a bag beneath everything ordinary, to possess it without announcing it, and she said that this country owed a debt to the men and women who lived that way, a debt that could not be repaid in full, but needed, at minimum, to be named out loud in rooms like this one, on days like this one, clearly and on the record. She shook his hand. She said, "Thank you, Sergeant Major." He said, "Thank you, ma'am." He meant it. That was the thing about Walter Beaumont that you had to understand the rest of it. When he said the courteous words, he meant them. He had not spent 26 years in uniform growing a shell. He had spent them learning the difference between the shell and what it protects, and choosing every day to protect the right things. The consequences arrive the way water arrives through a cracked dam. First one line, then another, then all at once, and inevitable. Within 48 hours, the Department of Homeland Security had opened a formal internal affairs review, case number DHS-IA 2C244471, assigned to the Office of Inspector General, which operates with independent authority and cannot be redirected by the agency it investigates. Agent Decker was placed on administrative leave, paid, pending the outcome. Supervisory Officer Olson was not placed on leave. She was interviewed in full for 7 hours on the third day. What she said in those 7 hours was entered into the record and is not fully public, but what is public is this. She corroborated the timeline. She corroborated the handling of the personal property. She confirmed what she had observed before she reached the counter. She answered every question. 3 other agents at that checkpoint gave voluntary statements in the following week. 2 of them said they had observed Decker's behavior on prior occasions and had not reported it. One of them said that he had not been sure what to do, that there was no clear process, that the culture at the checkpoint had not been one where that kind of observation was easy to raise. He said it carefully because he was still employed, and the IG noted it carefully too. The Inspector General's preliminary report was released 6 weeks later. It was 16 pages. It used the word pretextual 4 times. It cited the secondary screening referral as lacking documented operational basis. It cited the handling of the traveler's personal property, the appending of the bag, as inconsistent with standing protocol in 3 specific numbered subsections. It cited the 4-minute 11-second recording as fully corroborating the described sequence of events in the order described. The secondary screening selection log for the previous 90 days showed that Decker had referred 31 travelers for additional processing in that period. 24 of those 31 travelers, documented by name and photograph in the official log, were black men traveling alone. The other 7 were spread across other demographics and included 2 cases with documented operational basis. 24 out of 31. That number was in the report. It was also on the front page of 3 national newspapers. On the same morning the report was released, and on the home page of 11 digital outlets by 7:15 that morning, and in the opening segment of 4 morning news programs, and it was the number that 3 members of the House Homeland Security Committee cited when they sent a joint letter to the DHS Secretary requesting a briefing within 30 days. The briefing happened in 21 days. The TSA issued a formal public apology on the 14th day. The Department of Homeland Security Secretary issued a public statement on the 18th day. On the 22nd day, the agency announced the creation of a mandatory bias intervention and implicit bias recognition training module to be completed annually by all frontline screening personnel. At every major domestic airport, renewed every year, with completion tracked at the supervisory level and reported to the IG quarterly. The module would carry the name, the Beaumont Standard, 22 days. His name on a requirement. His name on a thing that would be repeated at hundreds of airports, in training rooms, with bad overhead lighting and folding chairs, by people who had never met him and never would, every year, indefinitely, for as long as the standard was maintained. He found out about the name from Darius Webb, who called him on a Thursday afternoon. Walter was in his classroom. He was grading papers on the Korean War. He was quiet for a moment after Darius told him. He said, "That is something." Darius said, "Yes, sir." "It really is." Walter said, "Make sure they build it with substance. Don't let it be a box to check. It has to actually teach something." Darius said he would make sure of it. Walter said, "Thank you, Darius." He went back to grading. His students had, of course, already found the video. Teenagers find everything. The Monday after his return, he walked into third period and found 22 16-year-olds sitting with an unusual uprightness and an unusual stillness, watching him come through the door with the specific attention of people who have learned something about someone and are now looking at them differently and trying not to be obvious about it. Walter set his bag down. He went to the board. He opened to page 43. He said, "Turn to page 43. A girl in the second row raised her hand before anyone had moved. Tamia Brooks, 16 years old, the sharpest student he had taught in 6 years, possibly in all 14, a girl who had the rare quality of pressing a question until it was fully open instead of accepting the comfortable first surface of it. She raised her hand and she said, "Mr. Beaumont, is it true?" He looked at her. He said, "Which part?" She said, "All of it." He said, "Page 43, Tamia." She did not move. She said, "But, sir, you could have said something right there at the counter. You could have just told him who you were." And Walter looked at her, at this 16-year-old with her hand still up, her eyes direct, asking the question that already contained the answer if you were willing to sit with it. And he said, yes. I could have. He said, and what does it mean that I would have to? Tamia did not answer immediately. She turned it over. He said, what does it say about a system if the way you get treated with basic dignity is by proving you have earned it? The room was quiet. He said, should it have taken a medal? He waited. He looked at them. He let them sit in it. Then he said, page 43. They turned to page 43, and he taught, and they listened in the particular way that a class listens when it has just been handed something they will carry for the rest of their lives. Walter knew the feeling from the inside. He had had teachers who did that for him. He tried to do it back. True wealth is what you carry when you carry nothing else. Agent Decker resigned before the Inspector General's investigation was concluded. His union representative issued a brief statement. No other statement followed. The 24 travelers documented in the secondary screening log. 24. Black men, named, photographed, processed without documented operational basis, were each contacted by the DHS Office of Civil Rights. Each received a written apology from the agency. Each was offered the opportunity to submit a claim for documented costs. The process was slow and imperfect and bureaucratic, in the ways that government processes are slow and imperfect and bureaucratic, and it was also real, and it was also more than had happened before, which is not the same as enough, but is not the same as nothing. Priya Okafor completed her law school interview the day after the video. She had been admitted before anything happened. She became an immigration attorney. That part came later, and separately, and belongs to her own story. Darius Webb was promoted within the Veterans Advocacy Organization the following year. He used his expanded platform to push for mandatory body-worn and fixed recording equipment at all secondary screening stations in airports, processing more than 5 million passengers annually. 3 senators co-sponsored the resulting bill. It passed the Senate Homeland Security Committee by a vote of 11-3. The bill was named the Sergeant Major's Transparency Act, 2 names attached to one man. The Beaumont Standard. The Sergeant Major's Transparency Act, built from one Tuesday morning at a counter, from 4 minutes and 11 seconds, from 2 butterscotch candies on a floor. The year Walter turned 65, his students organized a ceremony. They did not warn him. Darius Webb came down from Washington. Colonel Raymond Ashe came, with both canes, from Cincinnati, and he did not tell Walter he was coming either. Maya came, 9 years old now, in a dress she had selected herself that morning, with her hair worn the way her grandmother wore hers in the photograph. Walter carries in the plastic sleeve, in the bottom of his bag, in the way Maya had studied the photograph once, without Walter knowing, and practiced in the bathroom mirror until she got it right. They presented Walter with a plaque. Tamia Brooks had written the inscription. She was 19 years old by then, already in her first year of college, already certain about what she was going to study. The inscription said, "To Mr. Beaumont, who taught us that history is not the past. It is what we decide to carry forward." He held the plaque and looked at it for a long time. He folded his hands the way Ruth had always said made him look like a deacon. He said, "This is too much." Maya pulled his sleeve. She said, "Grandpa, it is not." He put his arm around her. He looked at the room, at Darius in the back, at Raymond Ashe, seated in the front row with his canes leaning against the chair, at Tamia, near the door, with the expression of someone who has done something right and knows it. And at his students, 22 of them, in the seats, sitting very straight. He said, "All right then, thank you." He meant it. 6 months after the ceremony, he started a twice-weekly after-school program at Carver called the Carry Forward Initiative. Veterans from the Columbus area came in to speak with juniors and seniors about services, about transition, about the particular difficulty of coming home and learning to be still after years of being needed urgently. Walter ran it on his own time, on his own money at first. The year it received a VA grant for $42,000, he used the entire amount to buy books, 63 titles on military history, on civil rights, on leadership, on what resilience actually looks like from the inside when there is no camera and no medal and no one watching. He cataloged everyone. He put them in a room with 2 long tables, 8 chairs, and a coffee maker, and he called it the reading room. And he called it, in the official grant report, the one resource his school had needed since before he arrived. Tamia Brooks came back to Carver Academy in her junior year of college to speak to the incoming class. She was 20 years old. She was studying law. She stood at the front of the same classroom where she had raised her hand 3 years before and asked if it was true. And she said, "My teacher taught me that a man shouldn't need a medal to be treated with dignity." She paused. She said, "But it didn't hurt to have one." The room laughed. She smiled. Walter, in the back row, folded his hands and looked at the floor and smiled at something. Only he could see. True wealth is what you carry when you carry nothing else. The part that stays with me, and I have thought about this story for longer than I expected to when I first sat down with it. The part that stays with me is not the medal. It is not the moment the agent's face changed, or the 3 raised phones, or the supervisor picking the candy off the floor. The part I keep returning to is simpler than any of that. It is Walter standing at the counter while the bag is being emptied, and the clothes are on the counter, and the candies have already hit the floor, and his face not changing, not performing patience, not performing dignity, just having it the way you can only have it when it was never tied to what other people chose to do with you. That stillness, that refusal to become less than himself, to match what someone else was trying to make him. I think about that. I think about what it takes to have been through what he had been through, to have done the things that put that medal in that box, to have lost the people he lost, to have served 26 years, and come home and stood at a counter in an airport, where a young man with a name badge decided something about him before he said a word, and to stand there and not shrink, and not perform, and not sounce yourself, to just be. And here is what I want you to do with that tonight. I want you to sit with the question Tamia Brooks asked, the one she put into words at 16, that most people spend their whole lives avoiding. She asked, why did it take the medal? And I want to ask you a version of that question that is harder. What if the bag had been empty? Not empty, but ordinary. What if the bag had held exactly what it looked like it held? A paperback, some candy, a change of clothes, a photograph of a man you didn't know. No box at the bottom, no reversal, no color draining. What if the story had no turn? Would you have said something? Not what should you have done? not the version of yourself you present in conversations about what is right. The real version, the version that was standing in line with a carry-on and a phone and somewhere to be watching something happen 6 feet in front of you. Drop one word in the comments. Just one. Not an explanation. Not a defense. One word that tells the truth about what you would have done and costs you something to write it. If that one word is going to be honest, if it's going to be the kind of honest that is a little uncomfortable, share this story with one person tonight, not to show them the medal, to show them the candy on the floor. And if you believe the quiet ones deserve to be seen, if you believe that the real story almost never announces itself, that real worth rarely travels with fanfare, subscribe. Because next time, I am going to tell you about a woman who spent 40 years building a stamp collection. Everyone called a hobby, who sat down across from the world's leading expert to have it appraised and dismissed. And what he said when he turned to the very last page of her book and his hands stopped moving. Stay close.